Hey, what's up, everybody? My name's Scuzz, and if you're as big a Wheel of Time nerd as I am, you're probably getting pretty hyped for the release of the show on November 19th. As anticipation for this show grows, it's really cool to see more people discovering the series as a whole. In terms of popularity, I feel like it's something that's always sort of flown under the radar, and in my personal opinion, the Wheel of Time series rivals the Lord of the Rings trilogy, which I know is a bold statement, but I stand by it. So in today's video, I wanted to take a look at all of the information we have leading up to the release of the show. Over the past year, Rafe Judkin has released a lot of information through AMAs on Instagram, Twitter. He did an event at JordanCon. So I've sort of curated all of the information he gave, a lot of which was kind of snarky, overly cryptic, and not helpful. So I've picked the best responses from him here to give us a good idea of what we can expect from the show. I'm really hoping that the live action series is able to do the books justice. I used a really helpful site that kind of already had all of his answers listed. I'll pop a link in the description below so you can check that out if you want to look at some of the information I didn't cover here in today's video. Just as a heads up, I don't really want to censor myself or do any extra editing, so there may be light spoilers sprinkled throughout this. Firstly, and I think most importantly, it became clear through a lot of the questions he was asked and his responses that Jafe is a true passionate fan of the book series. And I think that's going to be vitally important when it comes to translating the story for television. It was actually Jafe himself that reached out to Amazon when the show was just a concept, and he said that I can't let anyone else touch this. And it's just cool to see that amount of passion being brought to the project. He was asked what his favorite chapter is, which out of the whole series, like that's a crazy question to answer, but he did it easily, and he said that it's chapter 24 from Knife of Dreams called Honey in the Tea. It was really cool to see that as a response, because that is my favorite arc for Egwene as a character. It's when she's already made Amerlin Seat by the rebel Aes Sedai, but is brought back into the tower as a novice and sort of gains that respect all over again. He also answered questions about like what his favorite Forsaken are. His answer, I think, was the ladies Grandal, Lanfear, and Moghedian. But through working on the show, he sort of fell in love with the Shamael too. So just based on his responses here, it's clear that he's just very passionate about the books. The next big topic that kept coming up in the interviews done with Rafe were related to the difficulty in production, or specifically the challenges of taking a 1,000+ named character series and translating that into a TV show. I think Rafe has done an amazing job setting the expectation that this is going to be an adaptation of the books, so you should expect to see some changes. The first and probably biggest difficulty he speaks about is the number of locations. And I have a response from him that sums that up nicely. So he was asked, I think this was an AMA on Instagram, have there been any major locations or cities you've had to cut for budget, time, or logistics? And he responded, this is perhaps the biggest source of changes for us. Even with the massive amount of money Amazon has kindly given us to bring this world to life, to go to as many unique cities, villages, locations as they do in the books is simply impossible. We have chosen to do a few places extremely well, both culturally and with production design, instead of doing dozens of places cheaply and badly. This results in many changes that have huge ripple effects. If you don't go to Berlon, do you still meet Min? Do you still encounter white cloaks? Do you still have dreams of Baalzamon, etc.? I'm betting that most things that feel the most unnecessarily changed to people from the books, even if they're hugely separated from that specific location, will be born out of a location-specific change. The next big hurdle Rafe identified is just the sheer number of characters throughout the series. So in a lot of instances, Rafe mentions that he's sort of had to combine characters that don't have such a huge impact on the story, which I think is an okay way to go about correcting that. One cool thing he mentioned, in those instances where he had to combine or omit characters, he says that there are Easter eggs or subtle nods to the character in other ways. So I think that's going to be an awesome way for big fans of the books to maybe it dampens the loss of that character in some way, being able to identify. He didn't give any specific examples, of course, but watching out for Easter eggs and subtle nods like that, I think is going to be cool for big fans of the books. Another huge hurdle is internal monologues. It's something that Jordan used a lot throughout the books, and so it's an interesting challenge to take the information given in those monologues and translate that to the TV show. Does it happen via dialogue with another character instead? Does the character give a soliloquy, or is it just a voiceover? He didn't say specifically how he addressed that. He did identify, though, that this made working with Perrin quite difficult because so much of his content in the books is through internal monologue. And lastly, this one probably has mostly to do with budget, is anything that requires frame-by-frame visual effect editing has had to be omitted. So for instance, the ageless look of the Aes Sedai would require a frame-by-frame touch-up. So we're not going to see that. And another unfortunate casualty of this is the color-shifting cloaks of the warders. That would just require every frame to be touched up by the visual effects crew, and that's just not feasible, unfortunately. The next big takeaway from Rafe's interviews has to do with authenticity, meaning props, places, costume design, that sort of thing, and how it's being adapted from the books for the TV show. This is something that I think is vitally important at the core of really doing the books justice. Firstly, I think it's really refreshing to see that Rafe and the writers as a whole have been working really closely with Brandon Sanderson and Robert Jordan's survivors to make sure that there's nothing that Robert would have disagreed with, and I think that's awesome. Rafe makes it very clear that for all of the production design, the book is the first reference. He talks about how for some of the props, like he mentions Egwene's belt knife specifically. He said that they spent 1,000 man-hours to develop that prop, and it's not even a major weapon or implement that's vital to the story. And I think that's absolutely crazy. It became clear with the release of the first look at the sword, Rand's sword, and Tom Maryland's guitar, whether you agree or not with the fact that it was adapted from a harp to a guitar, it's clear that just a crazy amount of work was put into that thing, the sword and the guitar both. Nextly, Rafe talks about just the sheer number of different cultures that were represented in the book. He lauds Jordan for being sort of ahead of his time in the number of cultures that are displayed in the book, and Rafe made sure to carry that over, both in this probably shows through most in costume design. You know, you're going to be able to differentiate a Saldean versus a Domani from simply the way that they're dressed, and I think that's super cool. It also is going to come up in combat. There were several questions relating to combat, and they actually hired a weapon master for the show, who Rafe joked that could kill him with anything in his office. But Rafe says specifically that you're going to be able to differentiate the combat of someone from the Borderlands using a sword versus, say, a Terran wielding a quarterstaff. Another area Rafe highlighted that he wanted to be as authentic as possible was with the weaves, and I think that's going to be just absolutely crucial. We do have a look at some weaves now with the trailer being out, and I think and kind of hope that the only weaves that they've shown so far have all been with air. He stresses in his answers in interviews that he wants all of the different weaves to be different from one another, so you should be able to differentiate a fire thread versus spirit or air thread, and I think all we've seen up to this point is air in the trailer. In summary, regarding props and authenticity, I have a really positive outlook. Like I said, spending 1,000 hours on a belt knife that's not going to be crucial to the story anyway. They are definitely taking their time to do all of this justice. Lastly, I wanted to talk about some of the more frustrating aspects of Rafe's interviews. Like I said before, a lot of his answers were kind of snarky or overly cryptic, and I picked a few of the cryptic ones and other miscellaneous thoughts to talk about here. First, he was asked if any of the prologue on Dragonmount is going to be in the series, to which he responded simply, "You will hear that phrase." And I'm not entirely sure what he means about that. If we're going to hear the phrase prologue itself, or something from the prologue, like Luce Theron wandering around looking for Ilyena. This was something I was curious about myself. I think the prologue, if it's the first thing you see, is going to be somewhat more confusing in a TV series than it was reading it first in the books. So clearly something from the prologue is going to be in the series, but it's not exactly clear what yet. Rafe was also asked if there would be any Aiel in season 1, which I think the first Aiel was in book 3, don't quote me on it, but through other answers we know that there's going to be actually parts of books 2 and 3 in season 1 of the TV series. So he did confirm there will be one Aiel, and he said who it is will surprise you. So I'm guessing it has to be Aviendha. I don't know what other Aiel would surprise us. Rafe was also asked if there are any characters that were omitted from season 1 that are definitely going to be in season 2. His response was yes, and it starts with EL. Again, this is sort of overly cryptic. There's a lot of EL names in the series. We have Elida, Elaine, Elmendretta. But as we've gotten closer to the release of the series, we know Min's been cast, Elida's been cast. So my guess here is that this is talking about Elias Makera, who Perrin meets shortly. Perrin and Egwene meet shortly after Shadar Logoth. which is sort of interesting chronologically there. Maybe they just didn't want to introduce Perrin's wolf elements into the series just yet. I'm not sure why they made that choice. And lastly, Rafe was asked specifically if there are going to be any Forsaken in season 1. And his response is cryptic and sort of disconcerting to me. So he said his answer to if there are going to be Forsaken in season 1 was, "It depends what you know about the Forsaken." This has me a little worried. Chronologically, Rand, or the group as a whole, should have encountered at least 2 of them as the Eye of the World ends. Agnor and I forget the second. But either way, definitely they should be encountering Forsaken. So that cryptic answer there has me a little worried. Rafe did confirm some format elements about the upcoming show. It is going to be 8 episodes in season 1, and each will be between 50 and 65 minutes in length. That sums up all the information we have from Rafe up until this point. His last interview was in August. I saved 2 specific responses because it's sort of interesting to see. I think he's getting a bit nervous as the release of the show approaches. And he gave sort of 2 contradicting responses in his interviews. The first was, I think, from December of last year. And then the other was more recent, I think early spring of this year. So the first question here was, what words of hope would you offer a fan afraid that the show will cut out a lot of content? He answered, "I genuinely think we are cutting less than most people think. When I see people ask questions like, 'Are you cutting Min?' it blows my mind. I don't know how you do an adaptation without some of these characters. I think it'll be more of the smaller stories you'll miss. We can't have Rand and Matt travel to as many inns in their travels across the countryside, for instance. It's just not producible. So that will be more of what you miss, I think, and the books always exist to read for that." That was the question from December of last year. But then, in the spring of this year, he was asked, "Have you made any changes that hurt you or Sarah to make, but were necessary for the screen?" And this time he answers, "The writer's room floor is littered with my tears. Truly though, I don't want people to be unprepared for how different the show is to the books. To do a proper adaptation, it has to be. As a thought exercise, just imagine what we can only do 4 cities from Eye of the World. So from Emmons Field, Terran's Ferry, Barillon, Shadar Logoth, Whitebridge, 4 Kings, Green Spring, Caemlyn, Faldara, which do you choose? What are the knock-on effects for character and story from the ones you don't go to? Which characters haven't met each other now, and how can you reconnect them? We have amazing writers and hugely helpful support in Brandon and Harriet to tackle these changes, but they're not small. Gird your loins, my friends." So again, I think it's just interesting. It's the same information, saying that because of the just number of locations he has to cut out and sort of chronologically rearrange a lot. The only difference is that I think he's getting sort of nervous as we approach the release date for just the amount of inevitable outrage from fans that stuff was cut and rearranged. Rafe's growing anxiety aside, as a fan of the books, I feel cautiously optimistic about the show. He's clearly very passionate about the books, and I think he's doing his best to translate them for the screen. I'll leave you with one of my favorite responses he gave in any of the interviews, and that is, "My job is to protect the spine and the heart of what the books are." And I think if he accomplishes that, then there's really nothing more you can ask. If you enjoyed the information in this video, please do the like and subscribe thing. I'm planning another for next week or the following week. It's going to be trailer reaction video. So if the wheel wills it, I will see you then.